shortly. First of all, today we'll talk about ChatGPT. It's a very hot topic, of course, these days, but not just ChatGPT, but really the AI revolution that's impacting our industry at the moment. There's a lot to talk about. A lot is changing weekly or daily almost, it seems. What we're doing today is sort of a prelude to the TAUS annual conference that is planned for the fall. We'll have a lot of speakers talking about all of the developments that we're seeing going faster and faster these days. So today is kind of a preview or a sneak peek on the topics that we'll discuss in Salt Lake City in October later this year. So I think it's time to actually ask our panelists today to introduce themselves, because they can do that much better than I can. So let me start by asking Wayne Borland to do just a quick introduction of yourself, please.
Sure. Wayne Borland. I work for Dell. I manage all of our translations, interpretation, and ITN activities for the company.
Thank you, Wayne. And you brought today a colleague, Georg Kirchner.
That's right. I'm Georg Kirchner. I report into Wayne, and I lead the MT program at Dell Technologies.
Thanks, Georg. Christian?
Yes, hi, I'm Christian. I work for Microsoft Translator and report to Arul, who is the second Microsoft guy. And these days I look at language expansion and GPT/LLM stuff.
Who isn't, right?
Yes.
And Arul?
Hi, I'm Arul Menezes. I am the founder of Microsoft Translator, which started Microsoft Research, and I now lead the team in Azure at Microsoft.
Thank you. And we have Alessandro.
Hello, nice meeting you all again. I'm Alessandro, the Chief Operating Officer at Translated. I manage operation, and I also created a couple of our products, MateCat and ModernMT.
Thanks. And then finally, John.
Hi, I'm John Tinsley. I'm the VP of AI Solutions at Translated. I've just been here for a month. Previously, I was with Iconic Translation Machines building MT solutions, and then later at RWS. So now I'm working at Translated on building out our MT and AI related technologies and products.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. Of course, I also need to introduce my co-host for today, Jaap van der Meer.
Hello, everybody. Jaap van der Meer, founder, director of TAUS. Welcome back. We did sort of a webinar on the similar topic a while ago, and we were still in kind of a shock at the time. I think things are settling down now and will be much more down to earth. And I invited our panelists also to take a very more sort of down to earth look at everything and zoom in on the implications for our industry, not so much in a shock anymore as we were at the beginning of this sort of revolution, so to say. Well, thank you, 6 panelists here. Not a coincidence. The 3 companies provide sort of nice, distinctive perspectives on what's happening. We have Microsoft, of course, Arul, Christian, who are kind of responsible for this this revolution, you know, with coming from the big tech angle, very closely related to ChatGPT. And then we have Dell, Wayne, and Georg, who are big users, hundreds of millions of words, machine translated every year. And then we have a provider from our industry who's known to be very innovative and disruptive, maybe even Alessandro and John. So we think that brings a nice mixture of perspectives, and having 2 people from these companies ensures that we're kind of honest, you know, we get a balanced view from each of these 3 perspectives. So we don't have slides, we don't have a very rigid agenda. We have 4 themes that we want to make sure that we give some attention. And the four themes are: what are the impacts on data, the data side? I mean, that's of course the fuel here behind this revolution. What does that mean for everybody in this industry who owns data in the form of translation memories for most of us? So then the quality aspect, that's an important theme, obviously. What is the impact on the technology that we've been sort of been using over the decades? What are the impacts on the technology stack? And finally, of course, a very popular theme also in all these discussions, in every newspaper article that you read every day, is what is the impact on the business? Are we all losing our jobs? Will there be new jobs? And how do we see the business models being affected by this? So, well, let me first say I'm definitely myself. I'm not an expert. I'm learning every day. People might think that I'm an expert because I have a big mouth. I say a lot, but when I just say this, when I first spoke with Christian or with Arul and with many others, about this beginning of the year, I kind of had this feeling, what's all of this about? I mean, this has been around for years already, right? Why is everybody suddenly so overwhelmed by this? I didn't see much of a difference. It started for me 6 years ago with NeuroMT, and at TAUS we've been advocating all this change, and we were kind of disappointed that people didn't react and that things were not moving quickly enough, at least in our perspective. So disappointed, and now everybody was getting so excited. Why? I mean, what's the difference? And now I wrote a new blog and I said, no, it's true. It's a revolution. It's really a revolution. And the difference is probably not so much in the technology itself, because that was around for somewhat longer, but in the massiveness of the skill of the data being used to fuel this change, to make this technology really do what it's good at. And secondly, the very rapid adoption. It's amazing how quickly everybody is now jumping on this. Maybe because, like us, they were sort of in a holding pattern and waiting for something to happen for them to really jump on it and become active. But now, of course, it's overwhelming. Every week, every day, there is something new. And we have millions, hundreds of millions of people jumping on this opportunity. And that in itself explains, I think, the revolutionary state that we feel we're in at the moment. So much innovation. And so, yeah, it's a real revolution that hits the language and localization space. And that's the audience that we're talking here to today. And as some people say, the language industry is perhaps, the localization industry is perhaps kind of a center, the center of this revolution, because it's all evolving around language models and what have you. So yeah, let's talk about this first theme, data, but I'm kind of curious because I want to ask John, the first one here who's been out of this for a year. That was my feeling, that you were out of it for a year, traveling around the globe, and I don't know if you were reading the news or when you came back, was this all kind of a big shock to you, because you left still in somewhat quiet weather, and then how was it for you when you came back?
I never really left. I was just
oh, is that right?
Out of view. But actually, it was a bit of a catalyst in deciding to come back, and at this particular time, because there was a real feeling of, if you kind of don't do it now, you don't want to get too far behind. There was very much an element of that. And the next move for me personally speaking might not necessarily have been back into the localization industry. I might have said, box check there, let's go and try and do something else. But this has definitely reinvigorated is not quite the right word, but it's definitely shaken things up and made it's not kind of coming back into the kind of the more of the same element. It's more, there is more of the same, but there's also a lot of new things. So it sounds a bit cliche, but it's really exciting. Like it's kind of like I want to get back and get straight involved in this right in the middle of it, and that's certainly one of the things that this technology has done. And I think, like you said there, the adoption is one of the things that's really spurred it on, right? Because there's a lot of really neat technology out there, but for a lot of people, it's not really attainable. And so it's I think ChatGPT had a big impact insofar as it was made accessible. Consumers could use it. It was kind of, let's say, like a product or an interface built around it that allowed more people to use it, that allowed that kind of train to kind of gain momentum. And now that train's long gone out of the station. And I think that's what's kind of fostered this, like, you know, this excitement and this momentum that the technology has.
Yeah, indeed. Good, thanks. Yeah, so on the data side, one sort of sentence that I picked up on that you read about, I mean, data quality versus data size. We just said the massive amount of volumes of data. I mean, the whole internet, everything that's ever been written and published is now swallowed by these language models, but you know, and that creates all these miracles for us right in our face. But the industry is sitting on a lot of data. I mean, relative to, I mean, these massive amounts of data in the language models, it's nothing. But what is the role of that sort of very focused data that we have in our industry? Is the quality of that data going to help us to make a difference in our industry? So that is kind of the first theme that we wanted to talk about, the generalist sort of, you know, language models and the very specialist kind of stuff that we can do as an industry, as stakeholders in this industry. So anyone, I mean, let me just ask Christian to start with, just to call a name. What is your view on that, Christian?
Absolutely. I mean, this is, in a sense, large language models are the next step function. The previous one had been neural networks and architectures. And initially, there was a phase when stuff barely worked. Then it worked a lot better. And then eventually we got customization, fine-tuning, and specialization, right? And now the next step is large language models of whatever way, shape, or form you have it. And initially, they will be more general purpose based on the vast quantity of whatever people scrape to put into the model. And then quickly, folks will realize, oh, but for my specific use case, I get hopefully higher quality if I focus on some more specialized data. The difference rather will be that in the old NMT days, you would typically just fine tune. Now with the new large language models, where that may be either prohibitively expensive or just not that easy, you might just try to sneak in some of your knowledge, specialized knowledge via few shot prompting or other ways. But definitely, I mean, general purpose domain first, and that everybody can play with and be awed by. But eventually, if you really want to use it, you want to make sure that quality goes up. And for that, so far, over the last couple of years, specialized data has helped. So I would think this is a trend which continues.
Right.
Yeah. I just jump in. One of the things I think is super interesting about the large language models is that they're able to learn a significant amount about translation from monolingual data, right? And this is really very new as compared to what we've been doing in the translation industry forever, which is we rely very heavily on parallel data. Of course, we do use monolingual data, but our primary knowledge source is parallel data. I think there's several papers that have been published in the last couple of months that are sort of exploring this. There are attempts to reproduce, like, how much can you learn just from monolingual data, and the answer seems to be quite a lot. But there are also some explorations of how much of the translation knowledge embedded in, let's say, ChatGPT is in fact from monolingual data, or is there actually quite a lot of parallel data hiding in there because they've sucked up so much data from the internet. So I think the the jury's still out on the balance between parallel and monolingual data, but it certainly seems to be shifting in the sense that monolingual data is becoming more valuable than before. What that leads to is also quite interesting, which is that it's much easier, obviously, to get monolingual data, especially in specialized domains like Christian was referring to. And so there's possibly the opportunity to do much better in domains and genres that we haven't addressed very well before because we lacked parallel data in those domains. And maybe we can boost our quality in those genres and domains by using monolingual data, right? So I think that's a very exciting new development, and we'll just have to see where that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, if I may, just a quick follow-on question to Arul, because we talked quite a few months ago about when it all just started, and you mentioned one of the setbacks of the large language models is the language coverage, because they only cover maybe 10 languages or so. The industry that we're addressing here today in the audience covers hundreds of languages for their customers. So isn't that a big mismatch there? What do you think?
I mean, we did an evaluation back in February of translation quality with I believe that was GPT 3.5 at the time, and it actually has a surprising amount of capability even in sort of mid and low tier languages, maybe not as good as state-of-the-art neural MT in those languages, but there is some. There's a curve. I mean, clearly it's been trained on a lot of different languages, but also equally clearly it's got very much less data in the tail languages than it does in, let's say, German or French, right? So so there is that. That's definitely an issue. And it's not just the data, it's the vocabulary as well, because all of these models work over a limited vocabulary, and the amount of vocabulary space that's been devoted to the characters of, say, Tamil or Amharic or something is negligible or none, really.
Thank you. Sorry, I was cutting somebody off just earlier.
Yeah, I was connecting to what has been said now about the fact that finally we're able to extract a lot of value from monolingual data, and that helps considering the amount of content that is out there. But one of the advantages in our industry is the fact that we created and curated also a lot of bilingual or parallel content that can be used now to basically improve the output of systems like GPT or ChatGPT. It's sad that OpenAI hasn't used bilingual data or parallel data. That's what they say. But then Pan2 from Google, just a couple of weeks ago, they released this paper where they show the results in translating, also including parallel data, which improves apparently consistently over GPT. The fact that we as an industry, and of course Taos has pioneered this together with Translated, have created such large data sets of curated and clean and data that we can use for our purposes, it's still an advantage that we should use to build on top of these new systems. And I think that's the approach that we use when we created Modern NT. So when Taos and Translated created Modern NT, we used our data to build on top of the state of the art back then. We're going to do it again, basically.
Yeah.
I think,
if I may add to this, so we definitely generate a lot of data. A lot of it is also curated by translators looking at it and signing off on it, and translators, in fact, being data annotators. But the business reality is that companies like us, we acquire other companies, we merge data repos. We see a lot of inconsistencies in the data, and so we extend quite a bit of effort on cleaning up that data. And if parallel data is sort of losing its value and it's more about monolingual data or about data that focuses on branded items such as UI strings, company names, product names, then I could see that the large language models take care of the bulk of the translation challenge, but that you overlay those large language models with your proprietary glossary. And those proprietary glossaries are much easier to maintain than millions of sentence pairs that you would have to edit.
All right.
Yeah, and just to expand upon that a little bit, when I think about quality, data versus quality of the data, one of the things I think about just from a business perspective is if you go out and ask one of these large language models a generic question or translate content, right? It's pulling in data from everywhere, right? So you're gonna get some Dell content mixed with some HP content, mixed with some Lenovo content. And maybe for a very generic question, I'm okay with that. But but more likely I would like it to be domain specific to Dell and Dell terminology and Dell products. So I think it's really use case specific, right? If I need the content to be highly specific to my company domain, then the quality of the data or at least ability to prompt it with my data is really important.
Yeah. So we go back to managing our glossaries and terminology. We used to do that in the early days of localization.
You know why glossaries suffered? I think they suffered because of the agile development process, where basically we're streaming out hundreds of small jobs, where you basically don't have time anymore to attend to terminology up front. Yeah. And so either you have a fantastic collaborative platform where you can manage working terminology on the fly, you're always behind the game. Yeah. And so I think refocusing on the glossaries and serving up knowledge and information through a single window, which is your chat interface, I think we will be able to sort of, what should I say, take control of the issue around branded items.
Okay, yeah, indeed. Well, let's as agreed, let's change the theme now a little bit and talk about quality. And if I may go back to you, Wayne, for a moment, you're never shy, I think, of mentioning how much you machine translate at Dell. Do you know the numbers? I mean, on an annual basis?
As far as emptied words that go through our TMS, it's about 400 million a year. But we actually did about 1.5 billion words of translations last year through MT. Most of that's running through backend systems. So for analytics purposes, looking at call logs to understand trending and dispatching, and looking at sentiment analysis of user feedback. So translating it back into English so that sentiment analysis can be ran. So a huge number, and a lot of that, as Georg has talked about numerous times, a lot of that sentiment analysis and a lot of that data analysis could be done through a large language model without the need to do back translation. So it's going to be really interesting on how we look at those use cases.
Yeah. So anyway, massive volumes, and the point I wanted to get to is the question of quality. And by the way, we hear that now more and more companies, enterprises like yourselves, saying we're switching now to an MT first strategy. I'm thinking, well, shouldn't you have considered that a couple of years ago? But anyway, now they do, and that's probably an illustration of what we said earlier, the rapid adoption now, and people are ready to move and do this. But what I'm thinking about then, if you take this literally, then indeed you simply translate everything, right? Everything goes through the machine. But how do you then keep an eye on quality? This industry has been used to review everything by humans, translate, edit, proof, the quality review done by humans in the loop. It's now sort of very popular to talk about humans in the loop, but the humans cannot be kept in the loop here anymore. How do you see that, Wayne? I mean, how do we manage the quality in this empty everything, empty first strategy world, a strategy that you already adopted some time ago, I guess.
Yeah, so we've been talking about emptying everything for before large language models, obviously, and we today about 90% of the content that goes through our TMS goes through a MT workflow, and and we're trying to figure out how we get that last 10%, right? But to your point, as we translate more, and I don't know that you'd ever translate everything, right? Because you'd really need to think about, does everything need to be translated? If I've got an HR document that's specific to the US, well, I don't need to translate that, right? So, you're never going to translate everything, but you certainly can translate a lot more than we do today. But we're already thinking about how do you rethink about the workflows and stack on the different levels of review or analysis that you need. So for your some of your technical content, there's really no need to add anything onto it, right? It's good enough. But you start moving up the stack into like marketing content, then you want to start adding in some quality checks. And we're looking at how do you do that, through automated quality checks. How do you do post-edit distance analysis and determine where you don't even need to send something to a translator? Once you've got the final output, doing some QA on it through automated systems to kind of point you to, okay, here's this small percentage of it that you might really want to take a look at, and then use sampling. So, for a long time now, we've produced way more content than we could actually have humans do a review on. So it's really about sampling, and now not just sampling with humans, but sampling with AI, looking at doing, using LLMs to do the post editing before it goes to a human, so that you can, again, reduce down the quantity that needs human eyes. I think that's really what the focus is what is the content that actually is so valuable that you need to put those extra steps of quality on it, and then everything else, maybe you do some automated QA, maybe you don't, but it really comes down to making an assessment of risk. What's the risk of this content being bad?
Yeah, that's going to change for. So I was just going to say that's going to change for every different user. Every different user is going to have their own content types, their own risk appetite, their own requirements, and you really have to cut your cloth to measure in terms of what your quality assurance process is, how much you spend on that, how heavy it is, how light it is. So it feels like a cop-out answer, but it's always so often the answer is like it's going to depend, and you have that conversation with the customer. And I guess the idea is then maybe you have workflows that you can adapt depending on the specific need. Sorry, Alessandro, I put it in there.
Yeah, no, it's what I wanted to mention is, of course, the impact of the content, the value of the content, but also the life cycle of the content. So if you send out a newsletter, you have no second chance to improve that, right? So once it's out, it's out. But most other content that you put on the web, you can, of course, improve on. First, you publish empty, and then, if needed, you improve. The decision on which content to review may depend on a number of things. How many times that page has been visited? What is the feedback of the user? What kind of impactful issue has been published? Just recently, the Italian government published a page about the city of Camerino, which is a word in Italian that also means wardrobe, and it was translated as wardrobe. You want to fix that in seconds. You don't want to wait weeks. So what we considered translated that we've been doing empty first internally since 2012. So everything that we do goes through empty since 2012. But now we're using the empty first to also expand our reach into new areas of the market. So translating new content that wasn't translated before. What we had to build was not just a machine translation and the human in the loop, but an effective system to be able to fix errors in a matter of minutes, if not seconds. So when you publish some content, user-generated content, we do that a lot, and then an obvious issue is there, and the client notifies us of that. For us, fixing an error from the CAT tool to the CMS and then publishing, it's a matter of one click. So it doesn't have to go through multiple LSP steps, multiple interaction with translators. It's just a matter of minutes. And so that is also a way to manage the risks of when you go with MT first. So the pipeline basically behind what people don't talk about is also very important in making sure that we can implement ChatGPT just like we implemented MT in the past.
Yeah.
If I can jump in, yep. So
yes, please.
Just a couple of thoughts on quality, right? So one of the things that I think has become very, very challenging is it's measuring quality in machine translation has become much harder, right? And people are still using the blue score, which we know at this point is practically useless, right? In fact, I think the title of the metrics task from the WMT22 conference was literally "Stop Using Blue." That was the title. And there are newer metrics, but they all have challenges, right? It has become actually very, very hard to distinguish between two different high-quality modern machine translation systems, and to detect which sentences have in fact been correctly translated or incorrectly translated, because the errors are that much more subtle. And it's become not just hard for metrics, it's become hard for humans. So I'll just throw out a couple of things. One is like, well, so let's just set aside blue and say we should never use blue again, right? But even if you use a modern sort of embedding-based metric like Comet or Blurt or something like that, you still have the challenge of reference bias, right? Which is to say that your test set, the references in your test set are often post-edited from some machine translation, in which case you're not going to get a valid evaluation based on that. The second problem we have, which is actually far more of an issue today with large language models, is what I would call fluency bias, right? So our older machine translation systems were terrible at fluency, right? But they were actually pretty good at accuracy. Even if going all the way back to phrasal, when you're stitching phrases together, it may be an incomprehensible sort of mishmash, but the phrases were all related to the source. Today, you have the opposite challenge that almost anything that comes out of a large language model and even current NMT systems is beautifully fluent. Catching accuracy errors is much harder, both for our metrics and even for humans, because small accuracy metric mistakes that can have a devastating effect actually slip by. Things like an incorrect negation, right? If the source says like "don't do this" and the translation says "do this," well, that's obviously going to have a huge impact, and that's the kind of thing that slips past. More commonly, you have the issue of dropped content, where some important content from the source was just left out. Like it's like "do this if something," and maybe the whole "if something" got dropped. Or you have hallucinated content, which I mean, it happens rarely, but can have a big impact if it's in the wrong place, where you have a translation that's has either extraneous material or is in fact completely unrelated to the source, right? And again, I want to emphasize, even humans have a hard time catching this, because as humans, we are biased towards giving fluent grammatical sentences a pass. If it looks good, we think it's good, and we don't necessarily notice the mistakes. So I think that's good. That's going to be a real challenge, and I think quality measurement in particular is going to be very tough going forward. Already,
I think that's a big problem specifically for large language models, that with MT engines, we were able to rely somewhat on the deterministic nature of it. Like you could you could evaluate engines and put them into production knowing that they would generally achieve certain levels of quality, and some languages would be higher than others. Whereas with large language models, this whole concept of prompt engineering is like we play around with the input so that we can make it do something different than it wants to naturally do. If you give variations on the same input to an MT engine, you're still broadly going to get, a similar translation with broadly the same meaning. Whereas with a large language model, it can go off, as you say, it can hallucinate and go off in a completely different path. So that's going to be a real challenge, and it's kind of hard to see how you could have any sort of kind of mission critical production workflow without quite a reasonable level of, let's say, human in the loop from a quality perspective, at least until you can get some level of comfort that, okay, it's doing certain things in a consistent kind of reliable way. But until then, it's, you know, it's like, so we talked about risk appetite earlier on. It's going to be something that you're going to have to make a judgment call on.
But that's not so much different from the initial days of neural MT, right? So at that point, everybody was all comfy with the phrase-based SMT stack, hierarchical phrase-based MT, and then it took a while for us to understand how these neural engines worked, and at some point, a few years in, people became comfortable understanding the glitches, right? And you didn't have all these 100 repetitions of hey, and then fluent sentence continues. So I mean, step function, and now we will spend a few, as a collective field, some time figuring out what these things in our toolbox are. Shiny objects for sure, but some actually helpful. And I think then eventually that will help us build some tools which help with this Q&A. So one thing we definitely already see is in terms of metrics, in terms of QE, quality estimation, and GPT-4 is a match made in heaven, at least on preliminary findings we have, right? And then it seems there's a lot of goodness to be had if you have enough access to these models. That's a big if. And if you combine that with the clever human in the loop and reasonable risk strategy, I think that it will be an interesting combination. I mean, the keyword is exciting.
I think the unique business risk, though, with LLMs versus MT is when even though MT might have been wrong, you still knew that it was true to the source. But with LLM and all the monolingual data out there, you don't know that necessarily what it's saying in German is actually true to your English unless you have someone go and review that. So I think that's where the business risk is you don't know necessarily that it's staying true to your source content.
Sorry, Aru. And then
I was just saying, Wayne, you're absolutely right. And it becomes much more of an issue as you get to the smaller languages, right? Especially you go to tail languages, it produces what looks like fluent content in the tail language, but the chance that it has nothing to do with the source is, rises sort of quite rapidly.
Well, I want to ask a bit of a selfish question because I don't think anyone here has mentioned the new quality prediction estimation kind of features that we have at Taos also developed and we're rolling out now, and we see a tremendous amount of interest in that. What do you guys think of this? Is this going to be a mega trend in the industry that everybody wants to have this AI-based kind of quality estimation, quality prediction to replace the human in the loop for quality review?
I mean, it's for as long as I've been working in MT, the quality estimation has been this thing, every application of machine translation you can think of, if we had reliable quality estimation, it would be perfect. And I always use the kind of analogy that quality estimation traditionally has been about as reliable as the MT itself. So, if you know how much you're willing to rely on MT, how much are you willing to rely on the quality estimation? But again, then it's not kind of one size fits all with quality estimation. So I know we're working on that in Translated as well. And it's a question of
how good you can make it.
And for your own internal workflows versus a company using it. So we can build quality estimation, we can test it and get to a level of comfort where we're willing to use it in some circumstances to make decisions, perhaps to flag things where we're going to introduce the human in the loop and know where it's reliable, know where it's not reliable. So it's about kind of finding that level of comfort for your use case.
And I think
sorry, Alessandro.
And just one quick note, because I agree with John, but one additional element with the human in the loop is that we still need data, and we still want data that is guaranteed of high quality, right? So what we do is we do quality estimation. We try to figure out where we need to do the review, but we're using human in the loop all the time to improve our systems, automated systems, to generate high quality data for the client and high quality data to train better systems. So it's not like it's a finished game. We still need we need that part, I guess.
I think that quality estimation certainly serves the MT++ editing use case, but I want to dial back fluencies. I think increased fluency of neural networks has opened up the door for a use case that is supporting chats in real time across languages. And I do not think that with SMTs, stakeholders would have sort of latched onto this technology, because while it may be more accurate, it is very hard to read. And if you think of that use case of MT for chats, you have this very tight interaction between machine and human, very interactive. So let's say you get an MT output that is not easy to understand. Just as you would ask a question in a dialogue, you would follow up and say, wait a minute, I didn't understand this. Can you rephrase? And then your participant would rephrase and the MT would come out better. So yeah. Fluency has definitely opened up the door for this use case. And also another quality criterion is availability reliably within a flash of a second. So this aspect of quality has been overlooked, because if you do not get EMT served up, the linguistic quality, well, is really secondary.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is great. The clock is ticking, and we haven't covered everything that we wanted to talk about. So well, let's change the theme now to, if that's okay with you, to the technology stack. Before doing that, I wanted to ask Christian about Gemba and how you use large language models to do, this automatic quality estimation and blah blah blah. But we will cover that in another webinar or in Salt Lake City. Technology stack. Everybody is used to working with TMSs and CAT tools, and it's been debated many times before. Are these still the best kind of tools to be used? But now these questions become more actual. I mean, with prompt engineering and the MT first strategies that companies are finally now adopting, what is the place of these old-fashioned CAT tools and TMS systems? I mean, do they have a future, or how do you see this changing? Is the revolution impacting the industry there as well?
Well, I might be biased, but of course I hope there is a future, both because I'm
you created
a CAT tool.
Exactly. Yeah, well, yeah.
No, but MateCat is, of course, when we created MateCat, it was about translating one sentence, putting one sentence in front of the translator at a time, and having statistical machine translation in the back adapted on a terminology level. We were replacing words. Okay, that was the first thing. Then we moved to modern MT, and we tried to build an adaptive MT system. Then neural networks came along, and maybe Yap, you remember, we basically said, okay, we need to shut down our projects because we were based on statistical machine translation.
In the middle of the project, right?
Everything. Yeah, exactly. And we reinvented everything around neural. But the key elements were still there, meaning the CAT tool was useful to create the data. The TMS today is useful to manage the content. It's not just about having content in CMSs, but you need also to transfer that content and manage it into the different languages that you want to translate. You want to make sure, as I was mentioning earlier, that you know where each piece of content is going, so that you can fix it or update it, whatever. So I think that I hope that it will change. I hope that there will not be need for CAT tools based on the string level anymore. That is something that, as a translator myself, I used to hate 25 years ago. I still hate today. And the idea that we can work on context, which large language model manage much better, maybe opens up the path to different UX to manage content. But the principles are the same. You want a place where you post edit, and you want a tool that manages the pipeline of content exchange. That is still something that we see a lot of value in. We're actually investing a lot into what we call Translation OS. that brings together all of this content management rather than just the translation part.
And the tools will evolve as the tasks evolve as well, right? So a question that gets asked a lot generally is, what will the role for translators be in the future if MT is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, right? And so we talk about tasks. There's like post editing, then there's review. When it comes to large language models, we're talking about prompt creation, labeling, ranking, and things like that. So the tools are really there to facilitate the task. The tasks might change over time, so the technology will change over time, but there's absolutely still a place in the workflow at various different points for different types of technology. It's just a question of, as technology developers, making sure that your technology evolves and adapts as the tasks that people are performing or that businesses need to perform evolve and adapt as well.
Yeah. All right.
Well, the relevance of those tools assumes that content will still get pushed into the existing pipeline of TMS and LSPs on the other end. And so you could assume that at some point certain content types will cease to exist. I mean, I remember the day when we had printed manuals and it seemed outlandish and perplexing that we would do away with printed manuals, and they've been gone for a long time. So we could assume that certain content types that still require TMSs in our supply chain, like online help, knowledge-based articles, they will simply no longer go down that hole.
Yeah.
And then the existing infrastructure of technology and humans will more serve exceptions, content types that do require this input from the human.
Yeah.
Probably, 70% will go away.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. To the audience, we will try to save 5 minutes or so at the end for questions from the audience. So please use the Q&A function here in Zoom to type in your questions. Any other thoughts, comments on the future of technology in our industry? Do we expect disruptive innovators, people who take a completely fresh look at what's needed in our industry? Do we already see signs of that and come out with tools that nobody ever thought of, but hey, this is great and this makes a huge difference? We don't see that yet, huh? Nobody has flagged anything apart from the large language models itself, but yeah.
No, I mean, Google, when they released the Palm 2, they focused in their paper a lot about the translation capability as something that can be better than Google Translate. Maybe it's an internal feud between the team that works on the language model and the team that works on machine translation. We don't know, but I mean, they did focus on that. But again, it's for generic use cases, right? So Google, they also developed the AutoML, like Microsoft had the adaptive systems, but then they don't necessarily go into the specific niche where we operate in the translation industry. That is still where we, as translation company, can build successful businesses.
Yeah,
One interesting
thing. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
One interesting thing that I used to do when I look at these technologies, of course, the first instinct that you have when you see ChatGPT, well, the first thing that I did was I built a chatbot that would reply to translators so that my community management team didn't have to do that anymore. So I used the OpenAI API, the Q&A from the team, and built it. And that is the first level. The first thing that you do is, okay, let's try to improve the bottom line. Let's try to cut some costs. Then you move into, okay, how do I use this to get into my clients, right? How do I improve? How do I build solutions for my client? But really where we win as a transition industry is if we do the next step, and that is looking at these tools as a way to unleash new content that has never been touched, never been translated, that needs to be processed by somebody. And so when you find that angle, so when you create the opportunities to tackle content that has never been touched, that's where you build additional value for the industry and for each of us as LSPs. I think that's where we will build, we will bring disruption.
Yeah, right. I will, may I ask it, what Alessandro just said about what happened in Google, or we don't know what happened at Google, but can you comment on that? Are you all united after maybe initially seeing some threats internally from the AI people or from the open AI people that, maybe the whole MT stuff that you started and built up at Microsoft was going to be disrupted by this ChatGPT movement?
I mean, I think as you guys have been in the industry so long, we've been through multiple technological revolutions, right? Going from rule-based all the way back to, let's say, the rule-based to statistical, to different flavors of statistical, hierarchical, LSTM-based neural networks, transformers, and now large language models. And at the end of the day, the thing that's important is the quality of the translations that we deliver for the specific use cases that people care about, and some of the important features that are required to get you good translation quality, right? Like customization and handling glossaries and things like that. So yeah, the translation capabilities of these large language models are in fact quite impressive. And I think we have a paper we published back in February with some very comprehensive sort of evaluation numbers across quite a large set of representative languages, high, low, and medium resource languages. So yeah, we're definitely going to be incorporating the capabilities of the GPT models in our technology stack, right? But there's also a lot to bring to the table from the things that we do on our side. For example, distillation of knowledge so that we can serve up translations very quickly. I think Georg brought up the point that you need to have the translations served up within milliseconds in real time, and then the cost of serving up those translations. So all of those come into play. And finally, things like customization, glossary handling, document format handling, all of these things. So it's the whole package there. And the large language model technology is obviously going to be part of the mix because it's remarkably powerful, as we all know.
Right. Thanks.
I'd add one brief point. I think the word disruption is often overused, sometimes abused. Like at the end of the day, I'm not convinced better translation quality is disruption, right? So how the technology works in the background might be super innovative and disruptive in that space. But at the end of the day, an LLM producing slightly better MT quality than a neural MT engine is not disruptive. I think the disruption with LLMs in our industry and our use cases is going to come in different angles. Like Alessandro said, perhaps opening up content types that weren't suitable for MT before through rewriting UGC or possibly post-translation checking and things like that. So I think we need to think a little bit more outside of our box of we produced some translation at the end here, and think maybe from a workflow perspective or from a business perspective where we might be able to apply it to make actual disruptive changes.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Speaking of disruption, I think it's time to move to some questions from the audience.
Yeah, you're right. I was just thinking about that because we have this whole topic of the business redefined, but we're going to have a different webinar about that, or we'll do it in Salt Lake City. And indeed, let's switch to questions from the audience right now. So if you can pick one. Yeah.
Well, of course, there is this question about disruption. What is ChatGPT doing to our industry? So two questions that are quite related. Can large language models replace the TMS or CAT tools? And then maybe, so a related question, who is benefiting the most from ChatGPT so far? Is anyone or any of the different parties being disrupted? So what are your thoughts on that? Anyone? It's a question to all of you.
Well, I think the CAT tools will certainly change over time, right? We already talked about earlier, do you still need translation memories? but maybe not, but you certainly need glossaries, right? So I think, and the other thing that has been missing from TMS systems for a really long time is really good project management suites built on top of it for my side of the house, right? The client side. So I think there are lots of opportunities still for TMSs and lots of still areas where they can be improved upon. It's also very interesting when you look at, as we've gone through RFPs recently and looking at new technology and moving to a new TMS, one of the things that we're finding is more and more the case is this technology requires you to move to one LSP versus we've always been historically on a multi-LSP model. So that's one of the challenges too, I think, with all of this technology change is, do you as a client have to change your model to go make the best use of the technology that's out there? So I definitely think it's going to morph, but I think there's definitely going to be room for TMS as well into the future.
John, I think you were going to say something as well.
Yeah, I was going to say they're different pieces of technology, right? If you think, I was trying to think of an analogy. I don't really do bad ones, but like self-driving technology for cars doesn't change the car. You still need the car, but maybe the car adapts then. So maybe if the car is self-driving, you make like lazy boy chairs so that the passenger can be more comfortable as opposed to this thing that is designed for them to actually operate the car. So I think, it's the poor analogy, but like, LLMs might change the way the TMSs or the CAD tools look or how they're interacted with, but it won't replace them because they're different. They're designed for different things.
Yeah. Next question from the audience.
Yeah, this one is to Microsoft. So Arul and Christian, do you see large MT brands like Microsoft being revamped with LLM spin-off products in 2023 or maybe further down the line? For example, Microsoft Translator on Marion NMT plus Microsoft Conversational Translator on GPT. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think I sort of touched on that a little bit earlier. We all know that GPT is a remarkable new technology with some amazing capabilities, and so we are obviously incorporating it, everywhere in our stack, wherever, both to do what we've been doing before better or differently, plus new capabilities that maybe we didn't have before. So that all that stuff should be coming out, I would say, at some point soon-ish. Some of it we have published. I mean, so Jaap mentioned Gemba, but so this was a paper that Christian, who's on the call, and his colleague Tom Coachme published a few weeks ago, which was basically showing that you can use GPT for quality estimation, and it does like remarkably well. So that's one part of that whole technology stack that I think GPT is already, inserted itself really well into that space. But yeah.
So that was a yes. Yes.
Yeah. Long answer.
Short answer. Yes.
Short one.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe just one final question from the audience. We have a few more, but we're almost at the hour. We've talked a lot about the text, of course, but what about text to speech? So do you foresee a possible integration of ChatGPT with text-to-speech capabilities? And then would this, of course, impact then the interpretation services?
One answer from one speaker.
Short answer, yeah.
Who goes?
Or does it require another?
That was a big threshold to say that.
Yeah.
we owe this question to the audience and answer to the audience, and there are more questions. So what we will do is share those with the panelists and maybe get some smart answers from them in writing and then share them with everybody. Indeed, we're at the final minute of this webinar. That was fun and so easy. I tell you, to everybody else who wants to organize a webinar, just make sure that you get great people together in a room, in a virtual room, and it will be just like this, so easy. So that's what we plan to do in Salt Lake City. Just a final pitch for that on the mic. We have some specific calls for speakers and.
Yeah, we have our call for proposals open now. So if any of the topics today were touching your interest, then please don't hesitate to submit any proposal. From your end, we have an early bird fee. So if you'd like to join us in the room, just participate from the audience, you're very welcome. We'll share the link to the conference page in the email with the recording, probably tomorrow, and hopefully also some of the answered questions indeed that were left unanswered today. So.
Wayne, Alessandro, John, Christian, Georg, Ahul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today.
Thank you for having us.
Have a great day, have a good dinner, have a good evening, and see you soon. See you in Salt Lake City, perhaps, or sooner
Thanks,
than
everyone.
that.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.